You know, when I was growing up, I was incredibly competitive. I could not stand to lose at anything. And some of that might just be because that's part of my DNA, but I think another part of it is because I grew up playing, we played like family games all the time. We didn't get a TV in our house until I was in fourth grade. And we lived in the middle of two towns that were about 15,000 people or so each, and we lived like dead smack dab in the middle of them. The nightlife where I grew up was non-existent. In fact, for me to play any sports, it was a big thing. My mom literally had like this taxi service all week. So when we actually had downtime at home, we didn't really watch TV. We played games, and we got I got very intense about it. I was the kid who, whenever we were playing a game like, I don't know, like Monopoly or any game like that where you had the dice, right? And if you play Monopoly, you know how this works. There's one point in the game where you need a specific number to be rolled. And if not, you're going to lose. And I was the kid who, every time that happened to me, I would take the dice, I would get ready to roll them, and then magically those dice would just fly across the room, back over my shoulder. And I was always the person who had to retrieve them. And wouldn't you know, every single time I retrieved those dice, it was the exact number I needed. Now, I won't say that my sisters accepted my word that it was an 8, but they knew better than to argue with me because I would just keep arguing until I won. I will not say that God has blessed me with a child that's just like me. So here's the thing, right? I grew up playing these games. Now, what's crazy about it is, like, my family gets really into these games. And my girls do. And my wife thinks we're nuts. And she's pretty sure that there are better things in life than to, get angry about a board game. And I think she's probably right. I have, mellowed a lot in my old age. But I still remember vividly, we will get together in family reunions and we'll play games. And I'm like, we're really nice now. And Kristen's like, no, you all still nuts. You're really into this. I'm like, no, this is calm. What I grew up in was crazy. We had games where you weren't allowed to wear rings or watches because we were trying to play games that involved slapping cards and people got injured. So we had make special rules. We were into this thing. And maybe some of you are sitting there going I think I've met your family. Maybe some of you are sitting there going I know people who get super competitive about stuff that doesn't matter. Maybe it's a board game. Have you ever, maybe you've been in the car with somebody at a red light. Not this happens downtown on Green Street at all, but maybe you're down there and you're in the car with somebody and you look over and another car pulls up to the red light and instinctively you grab that little I love Jesus handle up there. Because you know what's going to happen, right? It's going to go green, and it's going to be a drag race, whether the other car knows it or not. Here we go, right? Maybe you've been there, right? And you instinctively do that. Or maybe you've been down to I don't know, a little kid's soccer game, and you just know, I'm not going to sit next to that person because they're going to scream at a bunch of 8-year-olds to beat the other team and grind them into the ground. And you're they're 8-year-olds. And so you instinctively move your chair, right? And some of you are laughing. You go, yep, I know. And some of you are going, huh? If you're going, huh? It's you. It's you. Right? Now, what's crazy is as humans, we have a tendency, don't we, to get really into some things that probably we shouldn't get as into as we do. You know what I mean? We have a tendency to get really into things that it might be better if we just backed off a little bit. Right? If you have your Bibles, I want to invite you to open up to Luke the 12th chapter. And we're going to be just continuing this next passage of the Gospel of Luke. Luke chapter 12, we're going to start at verse 13. If you have the Bible in front of you, we'll invite you to open that up. It's also going to be here on the screen behind me. And if you have that flat screen, that tablet, and using that Bible app, feel free, please open that up. We think it's important somehow, some way, you get a chance to follow along with us as we open up the Word of God together. Now, if you remember, last week, Jesus is teaching. He has a bunch of people. This massive crowd is around him. This crowd is so big that they're kind of falling over each other to hear Jesus. And last week, he takes some time, he teaches the big group, and then he teaches his disciples a little bit. And it's almost like he takes a breath. And some person decides now is the appropriate time to ask their question. Luke chapter 12, verse 13 starts this way. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Let's pause there for just a minute. Again, you got to picture in your mind, huge group of people. All of a sudden, Jesus is teaching. He takes a breath, and someone butts in. He goes, Jesus, teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me, which implies a couple of things. It implies that his brother is there in the crowd as well. Because Jesus is teaching a big group of people, right? So somewhere, it's almost like, imagine if I'm sitting here preaching and one of you goes, hey, my brother sitting next to me is being a jerk. Tell him to stop it. Now, what's interesting about this is that in the culture that Jesus lived in, the idea of dividing an estate it's a pretty straightforward thing. Everybody knew kind of how it was supposed to happen. You had however many sons there were. The oldest son would simply get control of the estate when the father died, and he's supposed to divide parts up. The oldest son theoretically gets 2 parts. Everybody else gets 1. And so it's pretty simple. There shouldn't be a situation where we're fighting over the will. And yet what's happening here, for some reason or another, it appears the oldest brother is not honoring what he's supposed to do. And the younger brother decides it's a good time to call him out. We will shame him into doing what he is supposed to do, right? And in fact, not only will I shame him, what I'll do is I'll get Jesus to shame him as well, because we know how people work, right? Just keep heaping shame onto people and it'll magically make them perfect. Some of you have been around people before. Right? And so this is the point, like Jesus is teaching all this kind of stuff, and all of a sudden this one guy goes, hey, I have been neglected. My brother's not doing his job. Please force him to give me my share of the money. Here's Jesus' response. He says, "Man, who appointed me a judge and an arbiter between you?" Looks up, goes, "Dude, shh." And then he says to everybody, I love this, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." 2 guys fighting about dad's estate. And Jesus goes, hey, life's bigger than that. You have those moments, right, where Jesus is talking to 2 brothers, but everybody else gets to hear. And what the younger brother wanted, the younger brother wants Jesus to shame the older brother. Jesus ends up going to both of them and saying, guys, you're missing the point. You're missing the point. And then he keeps going. Jesus, a master storyteller, starts telling this story. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. And he thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. And then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all of my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich toward God. Jesus simply picks and tells a picture, tells a story that everybody who's there would have understood rather quickly. You see, the society was mainly agrarian at that point. They all knew what it was to plant and to harvest. They all knew what it was to plant massive fields and have to store those goods away to last for a while. So Jesus says, look, there's a guy, this really rich guy who had a lot of fields, and he goes out. Well, he probably didn't. He probably hired people to go out and to sow the seed. And so as this crop is growing, this really, really rich landowner walks around and he begins to look and he goes, oh my goodness, this crop is amazing. This crop is wonderful. This crop is going to be so massive, I'm not going to have room in my barns. And so he does what any sane, normal person would do. He says, I'm going to tear down everything I have and build new, bigger stuff. Because that's what we all do, right? Not just build an extra barn. He's going to tear down his original barn and build a bigger barn, right? And he's planning, how am I going to take care of this bumper crop of what I've been given? If you think about it for a second, the part of it that's really weird is that the effort to plant that crop and the effort to harvest that crop is the same, whether the crop produces a little or a lot. Right? It's the same amount of land that he is planting and the same amount that he's harvesting or he's having people harvest. And so what he's really talking about is this extra, unexpected blessing. Life is going good. I have enough fields that I've planted enough that I should be comfortable for the year. But the crop, the income is this level. It's supposed to be this level. And all of a sudden he's like, whoa, but there's a lot more out there. And this extra that he's doing, this extra blessing, he's going, oh my goodness, now what am I going to do? There's so much stuff here that I'm going to have to completely revamp my life. Because I have been blessed. There's so much good stuff here that I have to have a way to hold on to it. In fact, he says this, he's like, look, this is going to take care of me for years to come. I could just sit back. I could relax. I could not do a doggone thing for years. In the midst of this moment that all of them understand what it's like to have more in the garden than they expected. They know what it's like when you plant on a certain amount from that field and you get less or you may get more, right? They know what that is and they say, okay, we understand that. And then Jesus takes a moment and says, but take a step back. God's response to that is this: you fool. You fool. This very night, your life will be demanded from you. Jesus says, this is how it's going to be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but isn't rich toward God. In other words, if you can kind of get the idea, here's what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying, look, you're at this Monopoly game. You're at this Monopoly game, and you got all the hotels on all the right properties. And you are bringing in the Monopoly money. You're bringing it in hand over fist. You're bankrupting everyone. You're doing awesome. And you are so good at Monopoly that you're actually having to find a place to store your money because you have so much Monopoly money that you don't have a place to store it all. And then Jesus' comment is simply this: you got to take a step back and understand that Monopoly, no matter how good you are at it, Monopoly is not real life. There is something bigger happening. You are part of a bigger story. Then Jesus makes this statement. Actually, Luke writes this. Then Jesus said to his disciples. Now, can I pause here for just a minute? I want to take a moment to make an observation. There's a big crowd in front of Jesus. Jesus makes this statement about the fact you have to be able to step back from a monopoly board. And he says that to everybody. Massive crowd, everybody hears Jesus say this. And then what he does is he turns his attention to his disciples who are right there close to him. He goes, that's for them, this is for you. Now, this morning, I want to invite us to think about that for a minute. There are some of us in this room who say, yeah, I'm a Christian, I'm a follower of Jesus, I'm a disciple of Christ. If you're in that boat, I want you to hold on for a minute because we're going to keep going. But if you're someone who goes, actually, I'm still trying to figure this Jesus thing out. I'm here, my friend invited me, or I'm joining online this morning, and I'm just trying to figure it out. I'm not sure if I'm all in on that Jesus thing yet. Can I tell you something? If that's you this morning, thank you for being here. I promise you, if that's you this morning and you're like, hey, I'm not sure about this Jesus thing, can I tell you, thank you for being here. I'm glad you're here, and you have found a safe place. There's never a moment where I will ever do anything to intentionally embarrass you. And I want you to be here. My hope and my prayer is that you feel loved. My hope and my prayer is that you feel welcomed. And I will be honest with you and say, my hope and my prayer is that the love and the welcome that you have experienced will encourage you, lead you, and pull you in to Jesus. But this morning, if you're saying, look, I'm not sure if that Jesus thing, I'm still not sure if that's for me. That's okay. I want to invite you to just sit and think about that for a little bit. Think about the fact that there is a monopoly board, and life is that you have to step back from the monopoly board. And just ponder that for a little bit. Understand and think about for a little bit the fact that these things we do in life are temporal. There is an eternity that we will step into. And the investments we're making here are really just, it's a game of Monopoly. And there is an eternity that we will step into. There is, if we'd say it this way, there is current currency, and there is eternal currency or kingdom currency. There is current currency. We could measure that in terms of dollars or pesos or euros, or if you're Canadian, loonies, I think, are a thing. Right? And if you're not a follower of Jesus, you can say, okay, there's current currency, and then there's kingdom currency, the things of Jesus. Things like love, things like relationship with God, those kind of things. And this morning, if you're not a follower of Jesus, you're not a disciple of Jesus, just ponder that for a little bit and ask, where am I investing? Now, for those of us that are disciples of Jesus, those of us that say we're Christians, we're following Jesus, we're going to dive back in. If you're not a follower, it's okay, you can listen. Because Jesus is going to take this up another notch. So if you're a Christian, buckle up. Here we go. No one laughed at that. Yeah, here we go. So let's try it again. If you're a disciple of Jesus, here we go. Buckle up. Let's have fun. Here we go. Jesus said this, verse 22. Therefore, Jesus said to his disciples, therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. Life is more than food, and the body is more than clothes. Consider the ravens. They do not sow or reap. They do not have storehouses or barns, yet God feeds them. And how much more valuable are you than birds? And who of you, by worrying, can add a single hour to his life? Since you cannot do this very little thing, why do you worry about the rest? Consider how the lilies grow. They don't labor or spin. Yet, I tell you, not even Solomon in all his splendor was dressed like one of these. If this is how God clothes the grass of the field, which is here today and tomorrow is thrown into the fire, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not set your heart on what you will eat or drink or worry about it, for the pagan world runs after such things. And your Father knows you need them, but seek his kingdom. And all these things will be given to you as well. It's important for us to pause here for a moment and to think about this. Jesus does not say anything bad about monopoly. Jesus doesn't say anything bad about having a bank account with some zeros in it. He doesn't say anything bad about it. What Jesus does say is that where you put your focus, where you invest yourself, that is what matters. Now, I love how Jesus does this, right? Jesus starts by picking things all around them they can see. He says, have you noticed the birds? Have you seen the flowers? Have you watched how God cares for creation? I had the opportunity earlier this week to be in Estes Park, Colorado. And as I was there, I was able to walk around the grounds of YMCA of the Rockies. It looks something like this. And this is all around. There are mountains, no matter where you look. You're sitting in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. On some of the peaks, there's snow. There's actually this herd of elk that just kind of wander all over the place. On a side note, I was trying to figure out why some of you say hunting is so hard. I was like 10 feet away from elk. Apparently, elk are smart enough to know when you're trying to kill them. They go way away at that point. But man, when I was there, I didn't have any intention on killing elk, and they were everywhere. There were signs that said, stay 75 feet away from the elk. And I'm like, can't do it. Like they're like literally like walking across the sidewalk in front of you. There's this huge bull elk that's like 10 feet from the road. His rack is like 6 feet across. Just amazing, right? And while this place is filled with flowers and there's all kinds of beauty up there. In fact, I was reminded when we moved here years ago, my mom came and tried to help us move in, and she kept saying the Smoky Mountains are her favorite place on earth. And she kept saying like, oh my goodness, you're in the foothills of the Smokies. It's so gorgeous. How could you ever get sick of being here? There's no way. You can live here for 5 decades and you will never grow tired of this. And then I find myself sometimes just flying down the road. Oh, sorry, not flying. I find myself going down the interstate at the exact speed limit. And I find myself just off in another place and forget about the beauty all around me. Until these moments, right? You know what's going to happen the next week? The hills are going to explode in colors. And Jesus says, do you notice how God takes care of creation? Have you noticed that? Have you noticed what happens like when you're away from the mess that we create? Have you noticed what happens when you're just out in like pristine, beautiful nature? Man, God does a good job. It's impressive. We're the ones that dump oil all over ducks, you know. God's like, let's make some colors. God could have made the leaves just a dull gray, but he didn't. Like all that God does, the way that God cares for the creation around, it's amazing, the time and the effort, and just all that God does to make this a beautiful space for us. And Jesus says, do you have eyes? Can you not look around at the world around you and see the way that God cares for creation? And you humans, you are the pinnacle of creation. And if God gives the elk a place to eat, you think he doesn't care about you? Oh, if God bathes the hills in color every fall, do you think God doesn't care about you? If God makes sure that the earth it cares for itself and the trees grow and the plants grow and the water cycles itself, if God does all that, do you think God doesn't care about you? God said, Jesus, you are so much more valuable to God than any other part of creation. You are so much more valuable. The problem is, my friends, so often, here's what we do. We get so dialed in to the Monopoly game, and we get so dialed into making sure that we have it all, and our focus is all here. Our focus is all on the temporal, that we forget that the good God who created all things has an eternal plan in his mind. And you matter more than Monopoly. Whew. I don't know, someone need to hear that this morning. You matter more than Monopoly. Jesus says, if you look at the world around and see how much God cares about everything else, it's not, Jesus said, look, it's not that other stuff is important. It's not important. It's not that the clothes you wear don't matter. It's not that. It's not that God doesn't care if you eat. It's not that. It's the fact that when your focus, and when my focus, when we get so dialed in to the temporal, when we get so dialed in to this thing, this game that's going to last for 70 or 80 years max, we forget. When we get so focused in that we are part of a much bigger story that God is writing. In fact, Jesus goes on, he says, look, if you're following me, here's what you have to understand. He says, don't be afraid, little flock. For your Father has been pleased to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the poor. Provide purses for yourself that will not wear out. A treasure in heaven that will not be exhausted, where no thief comes near, no moth destroys. For, get this line, you've heard this before, I'm sure, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Look, in this whole teaching, Jesus never condemns money. He never says that monopoly is evil. Here's what Jesus says. If all of our life is focused on this life that we live, if all of our life is focused on the 70 or 80 or maybe 100 years that we're going to get on this earth, if that's where our entire focus is, and we never step back from the Monopoly board, it says you're missing it. You're investing in things that will not last. See, in this world, or in our little game of Monopoly, these work really well. You ever try to take one of these to real Walmart? I've never been gutsy enough to try it. I think if I ever tried that, there'd be rumors about the sanity of the Nazarene pastor. See, when we're in the game, when we're playing the game, when we're taking this temporal thing, man, Monopoly money works good. But in the real world, it doesn't. To take that picture in the same way, when we're in the world around us, right? When we're in our world, when we're actually doing things in this life, this matters. Try to spend this in heaven. It doesn't work. Just like Monopoly money doesn't spend at Walmart, this will not spend in heaven. There's nothing wrong with it. There's not. Jesus is fine with you having it. Jesus never says, don't play with dollars. He's fine with it. But my friends, if our faith and our hope and our focus is here, we are missing the point. And what Jesus is doing is simply begging us, pleading with us. In fact, Jesus is directly challenging us and is saying, if that is what matters most to you, if that's what matters most, you will be disappointed. In fact, I love this promise that Jesus makes. For you college kids, maybe you high school kids, this is one you might want to take out, print, put on your mirror, something like that. Jesus says this in Luke 12:31. Seek first his kingdom, God's kingdom, and all these things will be given to you as well. As you're getting ready to start out in life, you're getting ready to think about life and the different directions and roads that life might take. Here's what God's promise is. If you focus on the kingdom of God, if that is the focus for you, God says trust him. It'll work out. If your focus is the kingdom. If you graduate from college and you spend all your life chasing monopoly money, it'll let you down. Jesus says this, if you take your life and focus solely on the kingdom, you will never be wanting. See, the truth is some of you know this from experience. You know what it is. You know what it is to go, God, right now the game is looking kind of bleak, but I'm trusting you. And you have watched God come through over and over and over again. And some of you know this from the opposite direction. Some of you know what it's like to have everything, to have all the monopoly pieces. You know what it's like to have hotels on every property. You know what it's like to be bankrupting all the people playing with you, and then to have life fall apart all around you. There's nothing wrong with monopoly, my friends. There's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's a long, boring game. But besides that, there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with winning at Monopoly. Good gracious, if you are able to win, I cannot win this doggone game. But if you can, great, do it. But just recognize the fact that it's a game. And at some point, every single one of us will step back from the table. And when we step back from the table, the question is going to be, did we invest in real life? Or are we solely focused on a board game? My friends, you and I have 100 years at most to play this game called life. And when that time is up, we will step in fully into eternity. And the question is going to be, did we invest in the things of eternity? Now, if I'm honest with you, I think that there's probably very little this morning that I've said that most of us haven't heard before. Most of us have heard this some way. Maybe not with Monopoly, but most of us have heard this kind of idea before. And if you're anything like me, here's the problem. Sunday when the preacher preaches that, you go, yeah, that's a great idea. I like that. I'm going to stop. Well, I might keep playing Monopoly, but I'm really going to work on focusing on the relationships with the other players in Monopoly. I'm going to try to invest in things that are beyond Monopoly. And most of us have that, I think. We go, yep, sounds about right. But then Monday comes, and Wednesday happens, and Friday happens, and pretty soon we start to forget. We start to forget. And if you're anything like me, I feel like I've probably forgotten more sermons than I've ever preached. What helps is something to help me remember. Years ago, I preached a sermon. Talk about how we need to care for people around us, how there are other people in the congregation that are depending on us. We use this picture of Paul being let down the wall, and he's in a basket, and people are holding this rope, letting him down. And I ask the question, who's on the end of your rope? And in that sermon, we got some rope, and we handed out a little piece of rope like this. And I invited everybody who was there, said, take a little piece of rope. Put it on your key ring or something like that. And for me, every time I pull my keys out, I'm reminded of a guy from Dover. A guy that means the world to me. It reminds me that I got to keep praying for that dude. Keep caring about him because he's amazing. He loves Jesus. but we all need someone else on the journey with us. And I was thinking about that this morning. I was like, here's my thing. In all honesty, man, I love the picture of the game of Monopoly and thinking about it as it relates to life. How real life is not found in a Monopoly game, and just in that same way, eternity can't be confined to our 100 years. Well, man, how would help me remember that? Here's what I thought. You know what's going to help me? Have a little piece of Monopoly money tucked right in my wallet. That way, anytime I pull my wallet out and dig in there to go to Wendy's for my cheeseburgers or whatever's happening, there's a little Monopoly money in there to remind me of something. To remind me that Monopoly is not, just as Monopoly is not real life, these 80 years are not eternity. I don't know about you, I think maybe that might be helpful for more people than just me. So in a bit, we're going to sing a song. It just simply is a song that just says, Jesus, I want you to have every part of my life. With my entire life, I want to focus on you and you alone. And as we sing that song, I want to invite you to do something. I want to invite you to just come down front. Maybe for you just need to tuck some Monopoly money in your wallet. I don't know, maybe you want Boardwalk. Put it in the credit card slot there in your purse or in your wallet. Maybe carrying the duck around in your pocket. There's a duck now. Maybe carrying the duck around in your pocket's going to help. I don't know. Here's the thing. What I don't want any of us to do is to leave this place and go, Brian, that's a great idea. I'm glad Jesus talked about that. And then to completely forget tomorrow morning. My friends, that's ridiculous. So instead this morning, what I want to invite you to do is as we sing, I just want to invite you to come down and to grab a piece of the Monopoly board and to hold on to it. To say, God, help me to remember to invest my life in what matters most. Will you stand with me as we pray? God, you are the one who is the giver of all good things. You are the one who has given us this beautiful creation. This beautiful creation. And you love us more than that. So God, this morning, would you help us to remember to take a step back from the table? Oh, it's not the Monopoly is evil. It's not that. But it's that there's things that matter more. Would you help us to remember that? Would you help us to give our lives to that which matters most? And as we honor you, would you continue to care for us? In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.